Okay. Perfected whatever. Oh, this is one of them. I had a teacher, I told you about that. My older sister was a surgical nurse. She rushed an operation. She was really good. And she said that all the
the new people, this is the library, but they have all the new ones. She goes to the bank.
I could not walk out of there.
Oh, he's married to the collection manager at Washington County Library. He is I know it was Emery and Henry. Here it is, Georgia.
I just really
well, this is how you're doing Friends of the Library, which I already have a Friends of the Library.
All done that I needed to, shopping and cooking and stuff, so I live by myself. But yesterday,
These are the three movies that show Molly this. I don't know if we go, I don't know if we'll go on the 15th. Around the 13th. We might go, I don't know.
The movie's coming here?
They're at the cinema. They're free.
So they did that, and everything's fine. I don't know. I'll of course check it out, make sure it's still in the way. And then we've already got our.
As we were going through it.
I need to hear that because my two older sisters
I'll tell Mary, we needed her. We needed Mary.
I'll see the rest of them. Well, me either, but you're a little older than that one.
People here. I really needed that nap though. Well, I guess I must have. But I think I woke up naturally. Molly now. I woke up and I said, oh my God. So then when
Once a week online,
I called Mary, she said, I still feel like it today. I just couldn't pay attention to my body.
So I was fine.
She used to be another spirit. Nubia?
I have a couple of dogs. So just, she would out and walk them, I have our dog. So, we should got in our
Neighborhood. She's the one that bought a house in the neighborhood.
Okay, it's on. Good. Hello, I'm Greg Lilly with Friends of the Library. I want to welcome you to our Sunday with Friends. This is the first one we've done, since everything went to chaos. So I'm glad to see everybody. First, I want to let you know that we do have a new newsletter for Friends, and if you didn't get your copy in the mail yet, I just got mine this past week, but there are copies over here at the door. There are also membership forms, so if you need to renew your membership or start a membership with Friends, there's a form there that you can take home and mail back to us. And what else? Oh, we are working right now to make it possible to take donations and membership fees on the website. So that's in the works. So hopefully by this winter that'll be up and running, and you can just go in and renew easily that way. Or you can always write a check and mail it in as well, as you've been doing. Reminder, please mute your cell phones. After Jerry takes questions at the end of his presentation, there are refreshments out in the main part of the library. If you go to the far end that faces the valley, there's a table set up and we've got refreshments there. Okay, Dr. Jerry Jones grew up in Glade Spring during segregation and was bused at an all-black high school in Bristol. He earned his bachelor and master's degrees from the historically black college, Virginia State University over in Petersburg. And he earned his doctorate in education from Virginia Tech. His first teaching job was a business instructor at a Baltimore high school. Then for the next 27 years, he taught computer courses at J. Sargent Reynolds Community College in Richmond, Virginia. From 2002 to 2021, he taught computer courses at Emory and Henry and a freshman seminar called Racial Identity in Context. His book, which we have plenty of copies of, Go and Come Again, Segregation, Tolerance, and Reflection, details the history and culture of our area during the Jim Crow era. Go and Come Again was featured in the New York Times Sunday Book Review recently. With his 52 years as a teacher, Dr. Jones wrote his book as a tribute to the struggles that many African Americans faced in their pursuit of an education. And I've just finished the book, and I think if you haven't read it yet, you will be surprised and excited about what is possible and what Jerry's accomplished. So I want to introduce Dr. Jerry Jones.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And before I get into the book and details, I want to say a special thanks to all of you for coming this afternoon. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon, moderate temperature, sunshine. You could be anywhere. Could get an amen for being anywhere. And for those who are behind the scenes and do the organization of this type of event, I've been to one of these events before. I was not up front. I introduced one of my colleagues at Emory who had a book to come out. It's been about 3 years ago. So I kind of know what this is all about. Never thought that I'd be doing it now, but anyway, here we are. Let me talk to you briefly about just my life in general, how I ended up here today, how I ended up being back in this region after spending decades in other places like Baltimore and Richmond. I grew up, as he said, in Glade Spring. My first teaching job was in Baltimore. We're talking about a cultural shock from Glade Spring population 2, I'm kidding, to Baltimore population maybe 2 million. So there are all kinds of stories that I can tell you about going to Baltimore. I came to Richmond, as he said, in 1974, and stayed at the community college there for 27 years. But I'd like to start off by talking about coming back home to this area. It was 2001. Now, a lot of people thought that I moved back specifically to take a job at Emory and Henry. That's not the whole truth and nothing but the truth. For those of you who may have read the book already, you probably know that the main reason for me moving back was my mom's care. She had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and you know the story with that. They cannot be alone. So I started planning as early as maybe 1998 to figure out how I could come back and take care of her. I had a brother living in Bristol at the time, but she was in Glade Spring. by herself in the home where she had spent most of her life. She refused to stay with my brother and his wife in Bristol, so it just was not a good situation. I think it was in the year 1998, I did something called a sabbatical, which allows you to basically leave your job, your teaching job, and go do something else. So my sabbatical was in this area. I did a little volunteer work at Virginia Highlands or something, but mainly I wanted to be there with her so I could figure out, how am I going to take care of this? How am I going to deal with this? So I had to go back to Richmond for 2 years because the sabbatical says you have to go and do 2 more years for us giving you that year off, but it was okay. So year 2000, I'm still in Richmond, needing to get home, doing long distance care, tag teaming with my brother. It was not the world's best situation, but we had care for her spotty nonetheless. I never forget one day I called and I talked to Mama and I said, let me speak to the caregiver's name. Let's say her name was Barbara. And Mama said, Barbara's not here. I thought Mom was confused, but come to find out, Barbara wasn't there. Barbara decided to go with her boyfriend to Texas and get married and forgot to tell us. So it was a bad situation. There was a call in 2000 that kind of gave me a light at the end of the tunnel. And the call was from a young African-American young lady from Glade Spring who had gone to Emory, who at the time was on the board of visitors for Emory. She was an attorney and just happened to be working in Richmond in the legal field. She was home in Glade Spring. One of her uncles had passed away. And she called me and said, I hear you're retiring and leaving Richmond next year, 2001. I said to myself, how does she know that? But small towns, maybe some of you know. Can you relate to this? Everybody knows your business sometimes. So she knew, and it was true, that I was leaving. But she went on in her conversation. She's on the board at Emory and Henry now. She says, have you ever considered teaching at Emory and Henry? And I almost said, what you talking about? I didn't say that because I'm a professor now and I have to be at a certain level of decorum. But it wasn't that I did not know that Emory was a great school. After all, I grew up just, 3 miles from the college. Yeah, we couldn't go there as students back in the 50s or even the early 60s, but I knew Emory very well. It was that I didn't think that my background, being a technical computer guy, had a fit at a liberal arts school. In fact, I wasn't sure I knew what liberal arts was. Taught there 20 years, not sure I know now, but that's another story. Well, anyway, she said, well, send me your resume. The young lady on the phone, her last name was Hill. Maybe some of you know the Hill family. Bunch of them are graduates from Emory and Henry. And so I sent her the resume. I was still in Richmond finishing up that last year. So when I came home for something, I came to campus, met with the president, who then was Dr. Morris, I think it was, and the rest is history. In retrospect, now that I'm an old guy and can look back on my life and think, I couldn't have planned that on my own. I mean, some things happen and you just, if you're spiritual and religious like me, you say, well, it's the hand of God. Other people say it's luck. Some people say it's the stars or in the, I don't know what it was, but it was one of the best things that happened in my life. And I'm not talking about financially speaking. I'm talking about personality-wise. And even though when I came to Emory in the fall of 2001, to see, let me get my years right, 2001, I was in my 50s. And I really didn't know that my career would go on after I left Richmond. I was thinking, I said, well, I guess I can be the greeter at Walmart. Of course, back in 2001, there was no Walmart in Abingdon. I would have had to go all the way to Bristol. But I had a smile, and basically that would have been all I needed to be a greeter. But now there was the possibility of actually continuing in the career that I had in Richmond. One step further to show you just how ironic it was. Seems as though the faculty at Emory and Henry had created a computer course just months before I got here. Could I have planned that? I don't think so. They had done computer work. Computer is really not the speed of Emory, as many of you will know. That's not something they're known for. They're known for religion, they're known for the arts. Of course, they're now known for medicine with the campus up in Marion. But I didn't even know that there were computer courses at Emory and Henry, and lo and behold, for most of those 20 years that I was there, that was the main thing that I taught, the computer courses. And now that I've retired, guess what? They aren't offering computer courses at all this fall. I'm not sure that's smart, but who am I to argue with the powers that be? And don't you tell them I said that now. So let's talk about how this book came to be. When I first came to Emory as a faculty member in the fall of 2001, these 20s get you confused, you know. I was in my 50s, as I said before, and many of my colleagues were younger. Like one lady who is still there, taught accounting, just down the hall from me. I think she was in her 20s then. So even though I was brand new at Emory, I was not brand new to the idea of being a teacher. I had done it for a number of years. So when I would introduce myself, I thought it was important to tell people that I was from this area. I grew up in Glade Spring. I just didn't mention Richmond at all. I thought it would be better for them to think, oh, you mean that there are black people in this area? I'm just kidding that. But I felt that's all I would say. I'm from Glade Spring, and I'm actually living in the house where I grew up, blah, blah, blah. When you first meet a person, you don't want to lay too much heavy stuff on them right away. Of course, with time, it came out that my mom needed care because she was sick with Alzheimer's. And I forgot to tell you that another tragedy happened to me. The day I moved back here officially in May of 2001, my brother died. He died one day short of his 65th birthday. So I guess you might say the summer of 2001, before September 2001, the whole summer is a fog to me. I'm apprehensive about going to become a faculty member at Emory and Henry. I may be the only black faculty member that year. I didn't know until I got there. My brother just died. His widow is packing up and leaving Bristol. They were living in Bristol. A lot of stuff is going through my mind. So I was just sort of quiet a little bit when I was being introduced to people. And occasionally when I would say that I was from Glade Spring, the first question that some people would ask, young people especially, oh, that means you went to Patrick Henry. Well, I would pause for a minute. How much of this do they want to know? They just wouldn't. But eventually, as time went on, and I got to know people and my personality, they knew my personality and I knew their personality, I started opening up. And so obviously, for those who've read the book, you know where I'm going with this. Even though Patrick Henry was brand new in 1960, the year that I would start high school, we were not allowed to go there. We had to be bused all the way to Bristol, Virginia, where there was a high school for all of Bristol, Virginia, and all, I emphasize, all of Washington County. You say, why is he emphasizing all? Some people are going to hear names of places that they don't know. Where is that? Raise your hand if you've ever heard of this as a sub-community in one town in this area. Fractionsville? I see a few hands. Tubman Creek?
Well, I know Tubman.
Blacksburg? Washington County, Blacksburg, not Virginia Tech. All right. So what I'm saying is, all of those communities had been bused to Douglas starting in 1948, and it ended in 65, the year that I graduated. Before 1948, there was a high school here in Abingdon to serve the African American community. Do I have an idea what its name was? See, yeah, I'm a teacher now, so this is your first question on the test. Does everybody know the name of it? Kings Mountain, yes. I had an aunt, by the way, her first name was Omega, and there's a story about why she was named Omega, and I'll get to that in a minute. Of my mom's siblings, only one of them finished high school in this county, and it was Omega because of her age. She was born in 1919, so she would have been in high school age, I guess, in the 30s. Does that sound about right? Okay. So, after I started talking to my colleagues at Emory, more things started to come out about me and my past and my background and whatnot. Some people said, well, where do you go to church? And I said, well, there's this little Methodist church there and across the railroad in Glade Spring, and I started playing the piano in that church in 1950. And I played the piano. You a computer guy? I said, yeah. And you play the piano? Yeah. But there's a catch to my playing the piano, and I'm jumping around here, but again, for those of you who haven't read the book yet, you might be interested to know. I've never studied music. There's this phrase that we use to describe people who look like me who can hear a song and play it. Do you know what that word is? We play by ear. Of course, I started at 10 and now I'm 73, so I've been doing it 63 years. I think I got it in control. But there are disadvantages. Sometimes they put a songbook in front of me. We're going to sing hymn number 75. I said, well, you're going to sing it without me because I don't know them. There are advantages, though. Sometimes I can play songs in a key that fits better the people that are trying to sing. Am I speaking to anybody here who knows that some songs, even if you have a pretty good voice, you notice when you go into church sometimes, you can't reach any of those notes. Why is that? Because some songs are written in a very high key, even trained people struggle. So I have a saying when it comes to my music, I pitch it low and play it slow. And everybody can join along. There's another little trick that I'm able to do, namely because I play by ear. If you know anything about hymns, some of them have verses that go on forever. In my church, we never do more than 4 verses, but most of the people in my little church are kind of old, hint, hint, hint. And so if the song is moderate speed, by the time you get to the 4th verse, you be wore out. Excuse my bad grammar there, but I'm trying to be folksy as I do this presentation. So what do? I play the first 3 verses in one key, and then on the 4th verse, I modulate up 1/2 step. Could I get an amen for that? And they swear the Spirit has hit them when they get to the 4th verse. Remember that here. What the advantage of being at Emory and unloading my life to colleagues and whatnot, some of them even said, well, your life's so interesting, you ought to write a book. And I sort of laughed it off because after all, I was caring for my mom the first 4 years. She died in 2005 at age 93, so it wasn't like she was cut short because of the Alzheimer's. And in fact, had it not been for that mental condition, overall, what's the word I'm looking for? Health issues were pretty good. She did not suffer from diabetes and other things, and she did not lose weight. The reason I know is because I would have to lift her in and out of the car sometimes, and she was heavy to do. Good thing I had in Richmond signed up to go to a gym, so I came home in pretty good physical shape for my age, and you never know when it's going to come in need, so sure enough it did. I had written a book before, and I brought a copy of it today, and I'm going to pass it around just so you can be looking at it as I continue to talk. But the only reason I brought it is because it was a computer book written way back in the 80s.
Wow.
Of course, it's out of print today. I mean, if you go on Amazon and type in my name, it might pop up, and sometimes they might charge like a high price because there are so few left. But I just want you to look at it, and those of you who have the book Go and Come Again, to contrast the difference of writing a textbook about computers versus talking about personal stuff, like going to high school in Bristol and all of that. And as I was saying to some before we started talking, I actually typed the manuscript for this book on a typewriter. Did they have computers in the 80s? Yes. Did they have computers at J. Sargent Reynolds where I was teaching in the 80s? Yes. But guess what? Very few people had their own computer at home in the 80s. And I was scared to use the college's computer to write my book, because knowing my luck, somebody said, well, you use state equipment to write that book, so where's our cut? So I said, I'm going to write this thing at home, and I did. It was hard. And the book, I think, it would sell to students. It was a textbook. The students could buy a book for about $15. This is 1980s now. Guess how much I would get out of that $15 for myself? If I would make a guess.
$5?
$5, bless your heart. No, 50 cents.
Oh,
Oh, pass this around, and you can be looking at it.
50 cents.
Very little. But see, we made up for it on quantity, because at my community college, we used the book for 3 years. And we may have had, every semester, maybe 5 or 6 sections. You see where I'm going with that?
Mm-hmm.
And other Virginia community colleges used it for a while, and maybe beyond Virginia. So the 50 cents started adding up. That's all I'm saying. Okay. So it took years to get that little book done. No, it didn't take me years to type it. It took years to write it. And every time I would write a chapter or something, I'd have to send it to the publishing company, and the publishing company would send it out to reviewers, other teachers that taught that topic. It was a lot of work. But it was a learning process. So when Go and Come Again started to look like a reality, I just sailed on through that. I mean, it took months to do. And I wanted to do it quickly because some of the people that I was going to honor were elderly and in not good health conditions, and I wanted them to see the book while they were still alive. One of those persons was Mrs. Porterfield, who was my mom's last employer. She worked in the Porterfield home for about 20 years. When she went there, it was just Bob himself. He had not married yet. And they had not adopted,
Thank you.
what's his name? Son, I can't think of his name, Jay. Okay, all right. So let's talk briefly about the content of the book. If I talked only about segregation, I wouldn't have very much in the book. What could I say? We rode in the back of the bus. Nice that we had a bus that went from Saltville to Bristol umpteen times a day, back and forth. It was something good to have. We rode in a separate car on the railroad. It was good to have passenger trains in this area. Could have got an amen for that. Maybe again one more time in my lifetime. We sat, when I say we, black folks, we sat in the balcony of the theater in downtown Glade Spring. Wasn't it nice to even have a theater in downtown Glade Spring? And of course you could park anywhere you wanted to in the drive-ins we had in Glade Spring. So technically the drive-ins were not segregated. Of course there was a problem. Suppose you didn't have anything to drive in. My mom and I did not. And I say mom and I because my brother was about 12 years older than me. And so he left home in 1955 when he enlisted in the Air Force. So for much of my childhood and early teen years, I kind of was an only child by default. And my mom and I were trying to keep the house from falling. It's still there, by the way. And this year, the central part of that house turns 151 years old. It was built in 1870 by my great-grandfather. He didn't build it himself, he had it built. So after I realized that I'm going to have to expand it, even though the title has got segregation on the front thing, it's more like a story of my life in general. I guess you could call it autobiography or something like that. But I had to do that just to make the cut as far as how big a book it would be. So I interviewed other students who went to Douglas School. How many of you knew before you got the book that people who actually lived in Saltville went all the way to Bristol to Douglas High School? Did some of you know that? Yes. Some people are shocked, especially if they aren't familiar with this region, that Saltville is unique because part of it is in Washington County and part of it is in Smith County. Guess where almost all the black folks live? In the Washington County side. Guess how they got there? It's in the book, but just so I can talk about it in general terms. When I was going to Douglas, 1960 to 65, one of the parents drove the kids to Glade Spring where they caught the bus that we rode. Yes. There is a story in the book, I didn't know it until I started interviewing some of the students. Some students were brought from Saltville to Glade Junction, you know where Route 11 is in Saltville, where Glade Springs 1 and only traffic light is now, by taxi. And I put that in the book, and I met a young fellow one day who says, the taxi cab driver was my uncle. You meet all kinds of people because you wrote a book. I guess it needs write another one. No telling what's going on across the street or across the way from me. How many of you realize that there were black students living in Damascus? Any guesses how they got to Douglas? I'll tell you. They rode the Fuller Bus, if anybody's old enough to remember Fuller Bus, from Damascus to Courthouse Hill here in Abingdon, and caught the bus that way. Of course, the catch was, when we came back from Douglas in the afternoon, they might have an hour, what would we call it now, layover. There was another disadvantage with schooling that far away. What about extracurricular activities? All football games had to be on Thursday night. Why? Friday nights for the white schools. You say, well, Thursday's an okay night, yeah, but you gotta go to school next morning. That's the disadvantage. The other disadvantage is, if you don't get home in the evening until 4:30, 4:45, and you want to go back to the football game, sometimes you have to eat that dinner mighty fast. That's all I'm saying. So in other words, logistically speaking, I'm not talking about the politics of it. I'm not talking about the racial implications of it. I'm just talking about the logistics of it. Give another example, has nothing to do with this county. Do you realize that some people went from their houses in one state to their high school in another state? Simply because of segregation. And you'll say, where was that, down in Atlanta? No, how about Gate City right here in Virginia? Guess where Gate City black kids went to high school? Kingsport. What state is that? Tennessee? You see what I mean there. So it's ridiculous. That's all I'm saying. It's ridiculous. Before I go any further, I need to tell you something that happened since the book came out. A lot of times people ask me, when they're interviewing me, like one lady interviewed me on the radio, and she said, well, don't you have a lot of anger and stuff? I said, anger weighs you down. I know I'm skinny, but I don't need that kind of weight. Could we get an amen for that? When you reach a certain age, and I'm looking across the room now, and I'm not picking on you as far as age, isn't it nice when you get to a certain age when things don't seem to bother you anymore? Isn't it nice? I'm preaching now, is it okay? Isn't it nice to get to a certain age when you can look back and think that things happen for a reason and that you learn from it? I went on to say in this radio interview that my personality today, most of you don't know me, but if you do, my personality today is probably a result of all the stuff I went through. Yeah, Douglas included. Yeah, not being able to find a teaching job anywhere in the state of Virginia when I finished Virginia State in 1969. Where did I end up? Let's see if you remember. Where was my first teaching job? Baltimore. Let me tell you about that Baltimore job for just a minute. I'm almost done here with my introductory talk. I ended up at a high school where they were starting a program, curriculum in computer programming. And they moved me into that school at the very last minute because they saw my transcript from college and found out I had had one computer course. This is the 60s now. And nobody else in that high school had any courses. So I was like the person they were going to look up to. They brought in people from IBM to teach some of us teachers after school, but when we didn't have to pay. If I had stayed in Virginia, it's very probable that I may not have learned about computers until maybe the 70s. Or maybe even the 80s. Do you see where I'm going with this? Yeah. I, as a young kid in those early years, I was 21. I was real ticked off. I started using another word. Ticked is what I'm saying. I was ticked off when I couldn't find a job in Virginia because I had a quote scholarship, and the scholarship says for every year you have it, you don't have to pay anything back for every year you teach in Virginia, and I could not teach in Virginia. I was ticked off, yeah, I was the other off too. Okay. But in retrospect, do you see where I'm going with this? The retrospective view is I got to know computers and computer programming very early in that progression into the technology world that we know today. Maybe that's why the book came out when it did, because maybe I was a step above some others. There was a time when I would go to meetings of faculty at the college in Richmond and the other community colleges, and all of us computer teachers would get together, and I was the only black one in the group. And it wasn't because I was all that smart, all that gung-ho. It was because I was at the right place at the right time. Baltimore, for me, was the right place in 1969. Of course, like anything else, Baltimore had its downside. I don't know how much of you that read the book already would know about that, but I have to tell you this story. February 1970, there was a riot in the high school where I was teaching. It was an all-girls school. And those girls, how can I say this, were, let me make it delicate here. Most of the students in the year 69 were African American, simply because of locations and whatnot in neighborhoods and all of that. But most of the faculty were, and don't get this the wrong way, I'm just telling you what it was, they were older white ladies. Why was I there? Look at me there. Because of that computer thing, do you see? And I don't know the details, but they rioted one day in February. Here's the part that I want to share with you, not about the riot, because that was terrible. It was, no one was hurt or anything like that. That was 69. It was just mayhem. But here's the thing that's about it. I was living in the YMCA that first year. Why? Because that's all I could afford. And beginning teachers didn't make much then. Some things haven't changed. Do we have any teachers here? Gonna get an amen for that. I think my first job paid, I think I got $7,000 for the whole year. I want somebody to say, poor you. So I was staying at the Y. Here's the thing that I thought was funny. I came home early the day of the riot because they closed the school. And when I got back to the Y, there was a message that my mother had called. She called me often to see how I was getting along in the big city of Baltimore. And I said, she doesn't know about the riot because she's all the way down there in Glazebrook. Guess what? She was working in the Porterfield house and she was having lunch in that home. She turned on the Abingdon radio station, which used to be known as WBBI, and somehow it had made it on WBBI. That was a riot at Eastern High School in Baltimore, Maryland. So I can imagine that, oh my baby. So she called me. And I had to put that in the book. Again, irony of things that happened to me. All kinds of stories like that I try to fill in the book. And the last thing I'm going to say before I wrap up this part of our discussion, the last chapter, for those of you who haven't read it yet, you might notice it seems to be a little more professorial. It has footnotes and things in it like that. And the title of that last chapter is talking about success in academia. And I'm trying to say in that chapter that if you look at my background, I probably should not have succeeded at all. If you list all the things, we were actually on welfare in the early 50s. We lived in a house that was in poor shape much of my childhood. forget about the segregation, forget about going to an all-black college, forget about all of that. I mean, I started out kind of like at 0, or maybe even a -5. And I guess what I was trying to say in that chapter is, it's not so much about where you came from, but where you want to go. Could I get an amen? And so I knew that I wanted to be a teacher. Somewhere along the way, I decided that I wanted to do it at the college level instead of high school. Those Baltimore kids are something else. I said, Lord, get me out of here. The sooner the better. And the last thing in Baltimore, the last year I was there was a teacher strike. And I had to cross the picket line. I mean, I've been skinny all my life, and the fact that no one has beat me up yet is a miracle. It's a miracle that I'm still around at age, well, you know, some of you there, you know how it is. I have jumped around, obviously, but I wanted to do it that way so I could give you little tidbits for those who have yet to read the book. It's not a downer, in my opinion. It's more like a journey. It talks about segregation and things that happened to me. But everybody has a story, so that's my story. Okay? Now, I don't know how we do the questions. They just raise their hand and talk. Okay, all right, that's fine. I had to stay here because of the sound. Okay. By the way, I have been entertaining questions now for almost 10 years, and I need to give a prize if somebody asks a question that I have not been asked before. Where have I spoken? Churches, prisons, schools, libraries, street corners, and front porch. All right. Anybody's questions? Anybody? Yes.
Questions. First of all, do you know Mr. and Mrs. Dawson?
Yes.
Rita Dawson, who is still alive?
Yes.
101?
Yes.
That was the first question. Second question, what words of wisdom would you share with the youth of color in our community? In our community, thank you.
Let's talk about the Dawsons first. Mrs. Dawson, who was my Algebra 1 teacher, she was our librarian, and she taught something else too. She was also the student council advisor. Mr. Dawson taught me driver's ed, and we were okay with that. By the way, I had to ride the full bus to Bristol on Saturdays to take driver's ed because my weekday class load was too heavy, and they opened that. They went all the teachers, not just them, but all the teachers went beyond the extra mile to see that we got a good education there, including the Dawsons. I need to tell you this about the student council. Douglas High School, by the way, was the only black high school to be on a television show called Classroom Quiz. Does anybody go back that far? I see a hand. You remember that show? Okay. And Ms. Dawson she helped me to put that together. And the other question was about advice for young blacks. That's a hard one, and I tell you why. We left. When I say we, I'm talking about my generation. Many of them left this area as soon as they finished high school. Well, I left to go to college. It was my plan to come back here and teach. That didn't work out. Came back as 53 or whatnot, but that's okay. I would say that if you go back in the history of this country, the far west was our frontier. And a lot of people who went west to live in what became Wyoming and Montana and all those places, they had a special desire to see that the country would succeed. I would love for a few young African Americans to have that same mindset, think of this area as a frontier. Not that there's nobody here, it's that there aren't that many of color here. And in fact, it's not just the black population that's declining. Am I right in saying, everybody, that all populations are declining in the various counties? Maybe not so much Washington County, but the counties over in what we call the Coalfield area. So we need some good publicity people to start coming up with logo and signs and commercials that say just what I've said. Think of this area as the frontier of the 21st century, like the West was the frontier in the 1800s. How's that? Okay. Anybody else? I'm thinking that might be a winner there. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Yes.
I have read the book because the library book club here had this for the reading, so I read it and I enjoyed it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very curious. Your great-grandfather built this house in 1870.
Right.
And the Civil War ended in 1865.
Yes.
How was he able to do that?
Good question. Oh, thank you. I've had that one before, but that's always a good question. One of the things that intrigued me about him, by the way, you can probably tell from his picture, or at least you might be able to tell, that he had some Native American heritage in him. His hair was kind of straight and so forth. But anyway, if I had met him, I would wonder, well, why did he choose Glade Spring? He was enslaved in Wythe County. And as we all know, Wythe County is not that far from Washington County, right? Didn't I meet somebody with your area? Okay. So, the question then is, if he came to Glade Spring, and I'm speculating now, it may be that he already knew of someone who was going to be his financial backer. Or it may be that he knew of someone that he might end up marrying because she lived here in Abingdon. So it could have been one or both of those things. I find it ironic that he chose Glade Spring when he could have gone north. He could have gone to other parts of Virginia, but Glade Spring, you see. The reason we know there was a benefactor is because in the first deed, which is in the house right now, I could have brought it, it's all, yellow paper, handwritten stuff. His name and another name are on the deed. My great-grandfather's name was Crockett Johnston, like Johnston Memorial. The T in there, the T got dropped in later years. But anyway, another name is on there, Rush Crockett. We don't know who that was. We don't know if he was black or white. But we do know he was in Glade Spring. So, 4 or 5 years later, we get a revised deed, and Mr. Rush Crockett's name is no longer on the list. So the presumption is that great-grandfather Johnston paid off, because it was only $500 for a former slave in 1870 would be a lot, do you agree?
Yeah.
But he got a job as a concierge or whatever in hotels, and he was able to pay off this person in less than 10 years. So by 1890, he owned the house free and clear. Let me tell you this other story about the deed. His daughter, Crockett Johnson's daughter, was my grandmother. Her name was Gilliard, Gillyard. She went to elementary school in Glade Spring. And when she got to the 7th grade, just like my mom and a lot of folks back then, there was no high school like in 1890 for blacks, probably anywhere in the state of Virginia. So she went to Morristown, Tennessee. Raise your hand if you're from Tennessee. Anybody? Originally? Okay. There was a 2-year junior college for African Americans in Morristown called Morristown College. The interesting thing about it is they have a high school department. So if you could scrape together a few dollars and ride the train to Morristown, you could finish your high schooling, and if you want to stay and get 2 years of college, you get that too. How's that? So why am I telling you about Morristown? My grandfather and grandmother met in Morristown at the college, and they married in 1902 and moved into the house that was my grandmother's daddy's house. So here's the funny part. When my grandmother married her husband, who by the way was from North Carolina, she became Gilliard Wall, W-A-U-G-H. And after she married, she put the deed of the house back into her father's name. Wonder why? Just in case the marriage didn't work out. But it did. It did. And they were married until he died at age, well, he died in 1933. He died kind of young, in his 50s. Interesting thing about him, if you've not read the book, is he was Glade Springs' only barber. He had a barber shop in the town square. And I can tell you which building it was for anybody who knows Glade Springs real well.
Which one was it?
If you know where the what is that, Fiddly D or Fiddly something, what used to be the hardware right there in Glade Springs.
Oh, yeah.
On that side near, as you walk up toward the Senior Citizen Center. That was the last place where his barbershop was. And when he died, his funeral was in the Grace Street Presbyterian Church. Some people say, well, blacks and whites never did do anything together. Nah. At least in Glade Springs they did. That's on the other hand.
I was just going to say, I'm from Glade Springs.
Yeah, well, you know where I'm talking about, right? Okay. The first place his barbershop was, you'd have to look at one of those early pictures of downtown Glade Springs before they had the brick buildings. It was over on the side there, not far. You know the young man that has the place where he sews clothes and stuff for people? I can't think of his name. You might know what I'm talking about. LaBelle. That area used to have wooden structures, and my grandfather's first shop was in that general vicinity, 1902.
I have a picture of downtown Glade Springs when it was like that.
Do you?
And my great-grandfather is standing where they put stuff in the road to walk on. He's standing there in his overcoat.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think we are probably talking about the same picture. They used to be in the bank. You remember when they had pictures, those old pictures
This
in the bank?
came from,
Car cutting.
I know. This came from an estate. My granddaddy bought it in an estate.
I got it. Gotcha.
My great-granddaddy was C.O. Snap.
Snap. I remember the snaps. Yes. Gotcha. Very good. Are you still in Glade?
No.
Nobody else is either. I'm still there because the price is right. No mortgage, no rent. The house has issues, but most of them I can fix. Are you ready for this? Duct tape and Gorilla Glue. Yes.
How many kids were in your high school class?
33. And there's a page somewhere in the book where it lists the names. You wouldn't recognize the names. What I think is interesting is like where they were from. It's in there somewhere. By the way, I need to tell you this. Some of you may know it already. There was one family who went to Douglas. It was 2 boys and a girl, 2 brothers and a sister. But they were not technically Washington County residents. They were residents of Marion in Smith County. But they lived with their grandparents who had a home in the Plum Creek section of Glade Springs. How many of you ever heard of Plum Creek? Oh, right. And you say, well, why would they go through all that trouble? Didn't Marion have a high school for blacks? Yes. It was called Carnegie. But here was the catch. It was much smaller than Douglas and Bristol, and they didn't have any sports activities like football. So this family's name, the last name, was Brody's. Like Scrapper Brody, who became the first black athlete at Emory and Henry. He went to Douglas for most of his years, except his senior year, when he went to the high school in Marion. The reason I mention that is because you know probably the aunt of these three young people that I just mentioned. Their aunt, who was married to the Brody's uncle, was Miss Catherine Johnson of Hidden Figures fame. Did I know that when we were going to Douglas? No. Young people, we didn't talk about family back then. It's like, who gonna be my girlfriend? Who gonna be my girlfriend? What we gonna eat tonight? And who won the last game? We didn't really talk about my mom is kin to so-and-so had a baby before this. No, we didn't talk about that. And maybe you as a young person didn't either. Maybe that's the nature of being a teenager. You don't really care that much about the families of your best friends. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. But anyway, I thought you needed to know that. Yes?
You spend a lot of time talking about your church
Yes.
and the great energy you put into it. What do you see happening in the future with the church?
Well, we had church today, so we only have it twice a month. I wish I could tell you some good news about that, but it has declined significantly in the years that I've been there. It had a bump of attendance for a while in the early 2000s when I worked with Emory and Henry for them to give us an organ which I had restored. And it's not that the organ made people come to church, it was the publicity that surrounded that. There was a picture of me in color on the front page of the Bristol paper playing the organ at this little church. And again, I didn't plan it, it just kind of happened. So for a while, people wanted to see me and the church and the organ. It kept playing for about 15 years, but now it don't play no more. I paid some money there to fix, and it didn't last until the next church service. If I want an organ, I'll give it to you. Get it out. Obviously, the problem is demographics. And it's not that the church is all black attendees, mostly, but not all. But even whatever your ethnicity, we're just in an era now where church going is not at the top of the list the way it was in 1950. And so because of the Holston Conference, which is our Methodist conference now, we are surviving because Emory students use our church as like internship kind of thing, and we don't have to pay full price for preachers. And that's been on and off ever since I've been here. Some of them, you know, they go on to great things and they think about, I mean, there's no drama to preaching in a church where you only got 7 or 8 people, and they're glad to have you. Whatever you're preaching about, whether they understand it or not, doesn't matter. The fact is they're there. And it's that community that we look forward to. I'll check with me later and see if we do it better. The last year, after they allowed us to have church again with COVID the way it was, he was a student from Jonesville, Virginia. Anybody know where that is? Okay. And because of COVID, and because of him being a senior, he was not in Emory taking classes, he was where? In Jonesville taking classes, which meant that every time that he came to our services twice a month, we don't have it every Sunday, he told me that it was like 3 hours.
Yeah.
Because it's not very direct. I mean, you gotta come like down 23 and 11, I mean, it takes a lot to get there. You know those saying you can't get there from here? Well, it's a challenge. The student preacher we have now finished Emory several years ago. But she's going through like a career, and I don't think she would mind me telling you this. She's from Saltville. She has been a lawyer over in North Carolina, but she feels now that she needs to take a different direction towards religion. So she's again using our facility and us as her proving ground, and is doing a fantastic job. The reason I know that is because I took one of our members home today. He hadn't been there for a while, and he made a very profound comment. I can understand her. And I probably shouldn't say this. Well, you don't know. I won't call him names. But the last non-student preacher we had, like a person my age or thereabouts, one of her issues was you couldn't hear her. Some people just have a very low voice. Our church is not much bigger than this room. And if the preacher is there and the congregation, all 4 or 5 of them are there, and you can't hear it, it just makes it difficult. But this young lady, maybe it's because of her legal background, or maybe it's because of her persona, she's up there. And you can hear her. And she uses personal examples. I'm not knocking the Bible. Use the Bible, but bring in things that have happened to you and the biblical implications therefrom. Could I get amen? Did I cover that enough? All right. Okay. But thank you for asking. By the way, the name of the church is Ebenezer. Same name as Martin Luther King's church down in Atlanta. But there the similarity ends. Yeah. Anybody else? I appreciate this question. Yes.
Of the 33 in your high school graduating class, were most of them reasonably successful later in life?
Yes. Some of them I ran into later on, even though I lived other places. I was always coming back home because, my mom was living there. One became a pastor at one of the churches right there in Glazebrook. A young lady that moved to Atlanta, not Atlanta, but Nashville. She did well, raised a couple of children. One young man from Saltville became a teacher in Maryland. Statistically speaking, I think they did very well. And in the book, I sort of laid out maybe the reason why. I remember the first year that we were at Douglas in Bristol, and they did a dean's list, and the number of students on the dean's list, this was 8th grade, first year in our high school. We didn't have junior high back then, we went straight from 8 through 12. It was probably the highest number on the dean's list that any recent class at that school. I mean, nobody planned that, it just happened. But that was like a sign of things to come. Yeah. One young lady, the salutatorium, is that what you call the number 2 person? She came to Emory. And I didn't tell you about my little experience with Emory, did I? I came to Emory in 1964, the summer between my junior and senior year, not for collegiate study, but for a special summer institute kind of a thing. And there is a picture of me with the rest in that group in the picture, in the book. If you look at no other picture today, look at that picture and see how I have changed to be. Listen, I was skinny as a toothpick then, and guess what? I still is. I just, but no, it's true. I weighed 115 as a senior in high school, and I'm not going to tell you what it is now, but pretty close. Pretty close. But yes, thank you for asking. Most of them did well. Yes, most of them did. Anybody else? Well, we've gone over our time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and Dr. Jones will be signing your books. And what we'll do is we'll, I guess, move out here where the refreshments are, because everybody wants some refreshments. And Jerry can sign the books and answer any more of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Listen, Catherine, I think maybe we should, well, I left my book at home. Just pick up another one and have them sign it and put it in the library.